This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and today is Friday, and that means it's time for the 508th MTG Top 10. In this series, I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today, we're going to take a look at mass land destruction. I'm one of those horribly disturbed people who likes to play land destruction decks, so this list is close to my heart. This isn't the first MTG Top 10 that I've done on land destruction. I looked at it more broadly back in the 50th episode of this series, and that video definitely needs an update of its own at some point, but before I do that, I wanted to take a look at mass land destruction effects. In other words, to be eligible for this list, a card had to be capable of getting rid of several lands at a time. The card can have other effects too, but what makes it eligible for this list is the ability to blow up a ton of lands. Additionally, a card that has an activated ability that might allow you to destroy one land every turn wasn't eligible for this list. I decided instead to focus on single effects that destroy multiple lands, since they are more of a sure thing when it comes to mass land destruction. These days, we very rarely see cards that can blow up multiple lands, since Wizards of the Coast feels like they aren't very fun for players. So, most of the cards on this list received their first printing quite some time ago. Before we get to the list, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first-tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours and Mythic Championships. And a second-tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like Grand Prix and Magic Fests. Alright, with all of that out of the way, let's take a look at the 10 mass land destruction cards that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. At number 10, I have Yokelhops. This is one of my all-time favorite Magic cards. In fact, you saw my 6th edition copy of the card behind me in the intro to this video. This powerful sorcery destroys all lands, creatures, and artifacts, so it is quite the reset button, especially in the time before Planeswalkers existed. It found success in both Standard and Ice Age block constructed between 1995 and 1996, and it was generally featured in control decks. Yokelhops then went idle for about 25 years until earlier this year when a Yokelhops control deck emerged in Legacy. This is a different spin on the mono-red prison decks of the format. It uses various lock pieces like Trinisphere and Chalice of the Void to keep the opponent from being able to do things, and then uses Yokelhops to clean everything up. This blows up the lock pieces, but it also gets rid of all lands, so you don't really care. In this particular deck, the fact that Yokelhops doesn't blow up Planeswalkers is a good thing, because the deck looks to win the game using them when the dust clears. This could mean a resurgence for this old-school mass land destruction spell, and I certainly hope that's the case. At number 9, it's Wildfire, another old favorite of mine. I know, you're probably thinking I'm going to say that about every card on the list, but this is the last time, I promise. Anyway, Wildfire does 4 damage to the whole board and makes both players sacrifice 4 lands. It gained all of its points in 1999 in both Block and Standard. In Block, it was simply one of the most powerful cards in the format, resulting in 3 top 8s at the Block Pro Tour in 3 completely different decks. This included a Tolarian Academy combo deck, a Ponza deck, which is basically a red-based land destruction deck, and a Tinker deck. Its one top 8 in Standard came in an artifact ramp deck that ran a bunch of mana rocks. This allowed the deck to ramp into Wildfire quickly, which usually got rid of all the lands, but the player who cast it still had access to the mana rocks they played, so they could just keep on casting stuff in the aftermath while the other player was crippled. While Wildfire did make a little bit of noise in 2006 Ponza decks in Standard, that deck never actually managed a top 8 at a major event, so it hasn't gained any points since 1999, and it could be in danger on this list in the future. At number 8, it is Devastating Dreams. This card has the lowest mana value of any card on the list by far, as blowing up a bunch of lands is usually pretty expensive. But Devastating Dreams has you pay a different cost to make up for its mana value. You also have to discard cards at random when you cast it, and when you do, each player sacrifices a land for every card you discarded. Obviously, this is a pretty strange card that needed the right environment to thrive, and as a result, it came and went in both block and standard without anybody caring about it. Then along came Life from the Loam, which spawned an eponymous deck in Extended and Legacy. That deck was all about using Life from the Loam to create serious card advantage with lands, and it was a pretty perfect marriage with Devastating Dreams, because you could easily get your lands and Life from the Loam back from the graveyard and then do other stuff with all of those cards. You could also use Life from the Loam ahead of Devastating Dreams to get lands back from your graveyard so that you had cards to discard to Devastating Dreams. All in all, this made Devastating Dreams pretty one-sided. Dreams gained all of its points in those decks in those two formats, but it doesn't have any points since 2017. At number 7, it is Obliterate. This thing costs a whopping 8 mana, and it does the exact same thing as our number 10 card, Yokelhops. However, you do get a This Can't Be Countered rider on the card in exchange for those 2 mana, and that's a pretty big deal. It was a common sideboard card in Standard between 2000 and 2003, one that Control decks could bring in during mirror matches. It was also played in Extended in 2007, also in Control decks. It hasn't gained any points since 2007. Also, I'm pretty bitter about this card because it's the reason that Yokelhops isn't legal in Modern. Back when 8th edition was about to come out, Wizards of the Coast ran a pretty cool promotion where players got to vote on some of the reprints that would appear in the set, and Obliterate beat out Yokelhops in that head-to-head. That was a sad day for me, and that was before anyone knew that 8th edition was going to be the cutoff point for Modern. So I'm even more bitter about it now. By the way, if you want to know more about the craziness of 8th edition and its polls, it is something I covered in a Card Kingdom article. Check out the description for a link. At number 6, it is Cataclysm. This card has, well, a cataclysmic effect on the board. It makes each player choose one land, creature, enchantment, and artifact, and forces them to sacrifice everything else. It gained its first points in a standard white weenie deck where the plan was for the deck to get a strong creature in play and slap Imperial Armor on it, before then using Cataclysm. You would have the best creature on the board and your opponent would generally be defenseless, so you would easily win the game. Cataclysm didn't really show up again until it started to see play in Legacy in 2013, where it often appears as a sideboard card in Death and Taxes. That deck just likes to have one land and an Ether Vial in play to do its thing, so bringing Cataclysm in against control and combo decks is especially powerful. It has remained a sideboard fixture in Legacy Death and Taxes ever since 2013, and it's going to keep gaining points. At number 5, it is Ajani Vengeant. All of the effects we've seen on this list so far are technically symmetrical, even if most of the decks that use them find a way to make them less symmetrical. That's not the case for Ajani Vengeant, who simply has an ultimate that destroys all of your opponent's lands, and yeah, good luck coming back from that. The great thing is, this isn't really an ultimate you can just sort of roll your eyes at and think, well, I'm never going to do that, because in reality, getting Ajani to his ultimate was not a rare occurrence. This is because he came with a +1 that can do a reasonable job of shutting down the opponent's best creature, and he was often played in control decks where Ajani isn't that hard to protect, so it provided something of a de facto win condition for those decks. On top of all that awesome stuff, Ajani also has a -2 that is a lightning helix, so anytime you play Ajani, even if he can't get to that sweet ultimate, he's going to do something to help you win a game. That's why he's gained points in Standard, Extended, Legacy, and Modern. However, while he has been successful in multiple formats over the years, it's been a while since Ajani has seen significant play in any format, with his last point coming in 2018. Still, he is high enough on this list, and we see mass land destruction effects so infrequently that it's unlikely he'll ever fall off of it entirely. At number 4, I have included 4 cards. They can all destroy a whole bunch of lands, but only a specific type. Boil hits islands, Flash Fires hits plains, Tsunami hits islands, and Ruination hits non-basic lands. All 4 of them have had enough success that they would have taken up 4 separate slots on the list, and I didn't think that would have been particularly interesting, especially because they aren't that interesting to talk about. Obviously, all of them are quite powerful against an opponent who is very reliant on lands of a particular type, and can often end up having an impact much like Ajani Vengeance Ultimate, but only in very particular matchups, so of course they're sideboard cards. At number 3, it is Sundering Titan, the only creature to make the list. The Titan is an 8-mana 7/10 that destroys one land of each basic land type when it enters the battlefield. This makes him a pretty awesome thing to ramp into or otherwise cheat into play, since he can often cripple an opposing mana base while adding a very real threat to the board. The way he works, he can end up blowing up some of your lands too, but most of the time you set up the Titan to do far more damage to your opponent's lands. The only way one of your lands gets hit is if your opponent has no basic land types of the same type as the basic lands you control, and while that does happen sometimes, the decks that play the Titan make sure to minimize the chances of that happening. An example of this is Tron decks in both Extended and Modern, which seek to produce a ton of mana with the Urza lands, and run very few lands with basic land types anyway. In fact, they fully function even in their absence, so Sundering Titan usually doesn't cause any collateral damage. He just comes down on turn 3 or 4 and blows up an opposing mana base. It performs a similar function in both Legacy and Vintage. In the former, Cloud Post is used in a similar manner to the Tron lands, and in the latter, Mishra's Workshop and other powerful colorless lands that produce multiple mana are used instead. The Titan is going to keep gaining points in multiple formats. Getting it into play early is just one of the most powerful things you can do in Magic. There just isn't another card out there that so effectively adds to the board and destroys a mana base at the same time. At number 2, it is Armageddon. This is the original mass land destruction spell, as its effect is simply that it destroys every single land. People knew from the beginning of Magic that this effect was powerful, so it first appeared in the top 8 of a major event at Magic's very first true competitive event, Worlds in 1994. Over the years, it has more frequently been utilized in aggro decks, where the goal has been to get ahead on the board and then blow up all the lands so the opposing player would be unable to defend themselves. This was most famously executed in the Armageddon deck of the mid to late 1990s, with Armageddon a perfect fit for the deck. It had way above rate stats for the time, and once you blew up all the lands, you didn't really have to worry about the whole Forest Walk thing. These days, it sees intermittent play in legacy decks like Death and Taxes and Eldrazi, where it still pretty much does what it always has done. It's likely to gain more points, but it probably won't ever catch the number 1 card on this list, which is Balance. Okay, Balance is just as old as Armageddon, so we could say that it's tied with Armageddon for the oldest mass land destruction effect, but Balance does a bunch of other stuff too, so I think it's only fair that Armageddon gets more credit for being purely about lands. That said, Balance costs half the mana and also decimates much of the rest of the board. It is considered by many to be the most powerful white card of all time, and I think it lives up to that billing. When Balance gets cast, each player has to sacrifice lands until they have the same number of lands of whomever controls the fewest lands, and then they do the same thing with creatures and cards in hand. Like with a lot of effects on this list, the idea is for the person casting Balance to make it so this effect isn't really symmetrical. This is especially powerful when you combine it with effects like Land Tax or Zuran Orb. Land Tax allows you to stock up on lands so you can rebuild, and the Orb allows you to simply sacrifice all of your lands if you want to, so that Balance becomes Armageddon, only you just gained a ton of life. And you could even float the mana before sacrificing the lands to the Orb, so you could cast something after the board gets cleared, which means the game is over. Balance is so powerful that it was added to the restricted list for Vintage and Standard in 1995, and it was banned in Legacy when the format was created in 1996, and it has never come off of any of these lists, and it probably never will. It's too easy to make Balance feel like a one-sided board wipe. Despite being restricted in Vintage, the single copy of Balance that is allowed is played in a lot of different decks, including Monastery Mentor. It's going to keep on gaining points in Vintage, and that probably allows it to continue to sit atop this list going forward. So, those are the 10 mass land destruction cards that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you're interested in blowing up a bunch of lands, check out the description, where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each of them. If you want to make sure you stay aware of future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to make sure you're caught up on the over 500 other MTG Top 10s, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, you can do that by becoming a patron or channel member, or by buying some Nitsa Hone merch. You can find ways to do all of those things in the description. Thanks for watching.